Thank you, Qutaiba. Thank you, Atlantic Council. We're very happy at the Syrian Forum to be organizing this great event with the Atlantic Council and the New Lines Institute. In fact, as a Syrian NGO, we're, I think, one of the few Syrian voices, along with Multi-Faith Alliance and our friends at Syrian American Council, American Coalition for Syria, that are bringing this issue up front and starting to talk about it in a more in-depth and serious way. And our angle to this comes from two places. One, our work and our concern on the general security architecture of the region in general, because within the Syrian Forum we have a think tank program that focuses on regional security issues and their implications on the political process and where Syria is going at large. But also our interest in this topic stems to a great deal from our desire to see some form of accountability implemented within the Syrian context. As you know, that the Syrian regime and other major human rights violators within the Syrian context have gone with complete impunity almost over the past decade, over a decade. And from our perspective, it is time for that to change. Kebtagon being a very serious issue, as we heard, a global issue, an issue that has implications on not only the region, but Europe and potentially the United States, is something that needs to be looked upon from an accountability standpoint. And so we decided to look into this issue in more detail and commissioned our legal team to do some research on, starting to analyze the legislative frameworks that attempt to deal with the Kebtagon issue from a U.S. perspective. And what we found was that, as exactly you said, Qutaiba, all of these frameworks fall short from, addressing the most valuable and the most usable tool, which is, some form of a legal prosecution, criminal prosecution of those who are involved in some of these networks and criminal networks. And so what we found that, that gap in that legislation really needs to be supported and enhanced by an analysis, first of all, on the jurisdictional limitations that the United States can have within that context. And so we went into this whole question of narco-terrorism cases, the whole issue of narco-terrorism and the prosecutions that have been actively pursued by the United States to tackle, the issue of drug cartels in Central and South America. And we saw a number of very apt examples that really bring this whole question of Kebtagon home in a lot of ways, such as the Maduro case involving the previous Venezuelan president and his involvement with the FARC in Colombia. And we saw that the framework of establishing the extraterritorial jurisdictional reach into these types of cases address points that have to do with U.S. national security interest, including money laundering operations, supply chain operations, the use of the U.S. dollar, and all sorts of different questions and points and issues that could potentially bring this question of Kebtagon under the extraterritorial reach of the United States. However, we also found that there are some, serious research gap issues that need to be filled in order for us to establish these connections and these networks. Right now,
what gaps?
Right now, for example, we have, the New Lines Institute, Caroline, has been pioneering this type of research along with Karam Sha'ar and they've been attempting to, document some of these networks and some of and these chains and groups of organized criminals. And I think that is a major point that needs to be paid attention to, and that needs to be documented in a very systematic and a very serious way from a U.S. perspective in order for us to actually establish that nexus that brings us to U.S. national security. And what we can say right now that there's definitely a serious implication on the national security of U.S. main allies in the region, which in a way is connected to the question of U.S. national security. But these are the types of issues that need to be invested in more in order for us to cover some of these research gaps. I think from what we know, again, that's part of the research gap that we've been talking about, and this is something that really needs to be identified and looked upon in a more detailed way, because obviously we know that Hezbollah is heavily involved and heavily implicated, and I think that that the nexus could be drawn directly to the Iranian militias and the Iranian government. But that is definitely something that needs to be looked upon. I think and perhaps Caroline can even speak to this in a more authoritative way. What has been so far the closest connections have been done through the 4th Division, led by Maher Assad, the brother of the Syrian president, the head of the regime. And I think there also you can establish a very interesting connection with the Iranian militias, as anybody who understands the military sort of outlook or map and the presence of foreign militias and foreign armies on Syrian soil, especially in regime-held areas, will know that the 4th Division is Iran's, is the Iran-sponsored,
yes,
piece of Syrian military. And so I think, again, this is a field that requires a lot more investment in terms of research, in terms of documentation and evidence gathering. And that can come through several ways. One of them is for us to encourage our allies who have conducted countless, Kebtagon busts and arrests, whether it's the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Jordan, to encourage them to basically hold public prosecutions of some of these, arrestees. And till today, none of these arrests resulted in any public prosecution. And I think that's extremely important in order for us to, delve into the due process usually produces or pushes us to, document and to put a lot of these issues on the table. Of course, there are, political implications that we talk about, a political scene that has been shifting and that has been changing in terms of how these regional actors are rethinking the whole concept of rapprochement with the Assad regime. And I think that will have serious consequences on them changing their approach on the Kebtagon question from perhaps a law enforcement one to a serious national security issue that requires them to take immediate action. Excellent question. I mean, look, the legal community, if you will, that has been looking into these issues of holding such a regime accountable, for committing these just very long list and various list of horrendous acts, has gone to the conclusion that let's find any entryway into this, because going through, for example, the International Criminal Court and some of the most sensical and logical forums and tribunals is not possible, and it's been politicized. It's been vetoed by the Russians and the Chinese over and over again, and that's not a possible entry point. And so you see, Syrian and other international lawyers talking about using the Convention Against Torture as an entry point into some form of accountability, and this is, we see that unfolding now. Actually, in the next couple of weeks, I think the first hearing is going to take place at the International Court of Justice. Obviously, it's not a criminal tribunal. It's not going to hold any specific individual accountable, but it is at least an entry point into achieving, or at least recording, any sort of measure of accountability against such a regime. And so we believe that Kebtagón is another example of a possible entry point, and that is not being utilized, not being looked upon seriously enough from a criminal responsibility point of view. It's been looked upon through policy, sanctions, and law enforcement perspectives, but it hasn't been looked upon within that particular lens. The entity or the party that can move that conversation in the most serious way forward is the United States. I mean, it is, at the end of the day, a country that has a long history in dealing with drug cartels that are well beyond its borders, and that had, we have been able to establish that required nexus in order for us to prosecute abroad. But what I would say that we still have tools that we're not using, including, and again, this goes back to a research gap and the need to invest in some of this information. I wouldn't be surprised to see, people who hold U.S. citizenship who are involved in as some form of intermediary in any of these supply chains or organized criminal networks that reach all the way to Central South America, that are involved in the Kebtagón trade and the network of that ecosystem. And I think that would be a good entry point to pursue, and to make an example, or at least signal to the rest of the people, to the rest of the world, and to the region, that we are taking this more seriously than just I'm not here to diss the strategy that was issued by the administration in response to the Kebtagón Act, but we really need to show that we're taking this a little bit further, that we're using hard tools in order for us to signal to the region and to the rest of the world that we're taking action on this.
Yeah, and I like the entry point you mentioned, because for many regime officials, this has been an old tool, but it became more useful now. They have been seeking refuge at seeking other citizenship with the collapse of the Syrian state, to still facilitate their luxurious or business travels as regime agents. Yeah, they've been going to other states to get citizenship. Rami Makhlouf, the financier of the Syrian regime, he actually, when he had kids, basically, his wife delivered here in the U.S. to make sure that his kids, basically, when, push comes to shove, they have at least, U.S. passport that they can travel around. There have been actually a booming in businesses in Syria, providing kind of second citizenship from, some islands in the Caribbean. And again, because everyone is looking for a way to continue travel, as you said, this is an important entry point where we need not only to talk to countries in the region, but yeah, we need to talk to countries where we have actually agreements with islands in the Caribbean, to tell them we want actually those people involved who right now hold your citizenship or your passport.
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely utilize a lot of these extradition agreements out there. But I want to go back to just a point that I was trying to make earlier in one of the interventions, which is the sort of the over-politicized nature of all of this, and how and the approach of this administration in terms of not wanting to deal with this directly as a direct problem, but as within the context of the politics of the region in general. And I think we're witnessing in the past few weeks a shift by those very states that have started and commenced this whole process of rapprochement with the Assad regime, to quickly realize that it's not going to work out, that their demands are not going to be met, their concerns for the security of the region, whether it's drug related or other organized crime, criminal activity, is just not going to happen. But what's really remarkable about all of this is a statement that was made by the Jordanians at the highest level, where they're starting to talk about the Assad regime not only as unwilling to cooperate, because that carries the consequence and the implication that they hold a card that if we give them what they want, they'll deliver. They're actually saying that they cannot deliver. They're incapable of delivering. And I think that is a major shift that the U.S. administration has to really heed and pay attention to as a political moment, where we change our approach towards things like the Kebtاغون crisis in the region. Has it not been worth it? It's just nothing has been delivered. Nothing has worked. I mean, they've lost on both counts. And I think what I've heard this said by a policymaker once, or like just not too long ago, actually, that unfortunately the Arab League was holding a very important card in terms of leverage on the Assad regime, and it just gave it away for nothing. Their re-entry into the Arab League, and they're just realizing that again, it's not a question of ability, but it's not a question of willingness, but it's a question of ability, which is the more dangerous realization. We've always said, we've always heard as Syrians that have been asking for accountability measures, that he's evil, but he's keeping things in order, or he can keep things in order. And I think we're just coming to realize collectively as an international community that that's just not
clearly he cannot.
And this is, at the same time, this is not to argue that that takes away from his direct criminal, or the regime's direct criminal culpability and responsibility, because that could be established easily throughout decade, and has been, a mountain of evidence has been collected, and making these linkages through international mechanisms such as the IIIM and the Commission of Inquiry. But this is to say that we've entered a new era, and that is being realized by regional actors in a very painful way, and it will very soon have beyond the region implications that we really need to heed as U.S. lawmakers and administrators.